of Riverina.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker, and it's always good to follow on from the Australian Greens leader to put some rationality back into the debate. And I'm always encouraged, Mr Acting Speaker, by the fact that many truck drivers who keep this nation moving listen into Parliament. And what they would have just heard then was 15 minutes of passionate debate, yes, but debate that would have discouraged them perhaps from thinking that the nation is going well ahead with trade, discourage them from doing the grand job that they do for and on behalf of this nation as moving goods around. And many of those goods are going to port. And of course, Australia is a trading nation, and we need those goods to go to port, to get on ships, to go to other nations so that they can also realise and reap in the benefits of our farmers, our resources and everything else that we put on those ships. And I'm always encouraged by the feedback I get from our truck drivers. They've done a magnificent job through COVID-19. The National Transport Code has been able to enable them to cross borders when others couldn't, has enabled them to continue ferrying goods right across this nation in a timely fashion, in often cases to get vital medical equipment to where it needs to be, particularly in regional Australia and especially in remote areas. As I said, Australia is a trading nation. It always has been. 1 in 5 Australian jobs is reliant on trade. And when the government and Labor gets on board with something, it must be right, it must be good. And when the Greens are against it, well, that must give it the big tick of approval. It must indeed. In regional areas, that number is closer to 1 in 4 jobs reliant on trade. Now, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, RCEP, is a free trade agreement, and aren't we lucky we've got those free trade agreements? And aren't we lucky we've got a Liberal Nationals government which has been forthright and progressive in making sure that we get even more FTAs signed up, more FTAs agreed upon. And this agreement, RCEP, is complementing and building upon Australia's existing FTAs with 14 other Indo-Pacific countries. That is a good thing. It is a modern and comprehensive, as the name suggests, free trade agreement covering trade in goods, trade in services. And sometimes when we talk about trade, we don't always think of or remember those many, many services that we do engage in with other countries. Of course, investment, economic and technical cooperation, and it creates new rules around electronic commerce, intellectual property, government procurement, competition and small and medium-sized enterprises. New rules for those areas of endeavour. RCEP negotiations were launched in November 2012 between the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and includes Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and ASEAN's FTA partners Australia, China, India, Japan, New Zealand and Republic of Korea. Now, even without India, RCEP will still be the world's largest FTA, and that is significant. And just a market snapshot about RCEP. The gross domestic product in Australian dollars, $35.19 trillion, covering 2.3 billion people. Indeed, trade with Australia at 2019 figures, $712.65 billion. They're big, big numbers. And we need these markets. We need these export opportunities. And that's why I know the member for Wannon, the now Trade Minister, and others before him on this side of the House, and I'll give a compliment of those indeed on the other side when they were in government, have endeavoured to do what's right in the national interest. A report released on the 31st of October 2017, 4 years ago, suggested that trade liberalisation has given Australians higher income and more job opportunities. This Centre for International Economics report provided the very real and convincing evidence about the benefits delivered by trade liberalisation in the period 1986 to 2016. The report found that average household income— now this, bear in mind, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, was 2017. It at the time was $8,448 higher in 2016 than it would have been without trade liberalisation. And as it, of course, said, 1/5 of the workforce, 2.2 million Australians at the time, worked in trade-related activities. That was 2013-14, 1.6 million in export-related and 671,000 in import-related areas. So those figures are somewhat dated, and we know that what we've done in the meantime has only been good to bolster those figures. Has only been good to bolster the average incomes of Australians, and certainly Australians in trade-related enterprises. Real GDP 5.4% higher in 2016 than it would have been without trade liberalisation. Investment 11.7% higher. Real wages, and this is significant, and I know those opposite are always talking about real wages, 7.4% higher, and prices 3.4% lower. And we know that when you have a Liberal Nationals government on the Treasury benches, that we're always going to be promoting trade, and that those sorts of figures for real wages and real job opportunities are always going to be higher with us in government. You know that. The report underscored the importance of Australia's long-term commitment to free trade. And, Mr Acting Speaker, you and I come from a party that has been very trade-focused. Indeed, Blackjack McEwen was a brave pioneer to go to markets after World War II, when at the time it was not popular, to go to Japan, to trade with that nation, and others since have followed on that fine tradition. And I know you and I are very proud of that fact in our parties, but we know too that regional Liberals very much rely on the trade, the opportunities, the market access that our policies certainly promote. Now, any move back to high tariffs and trade barriers would see job losses. We know that. Cuts in household consumption and falling living standards, according to the report. And the report that was put out in 2017, it was right then, as it is, of course, today in 2021. Now, since the CIE's modelling excludes services and investment and all liberalisation by trading partners, its estimates of the benefits of trade liberalisation are conservative. And so you can imagine the figures put in that report 4 years ago now, what they are indeed today. And as I say, we've finalised 8 FTAs since coming back into office. That is great. We have reached agreement in principle on a United Kingdom FTA, and we're pursuing, obviously, an FTA with the European Union. And that is encouraging for our farmers, for those truckies who are at the current point in time driving around those fantastic goods that your electorate, the fine electorate of Gippsland, which punches well above its weight when it comes to output, and indeed mine in the Riverina and Central West. Australia has FTAs with 8 of our top 10 trading partners. We have lifted our share of trade, and this is an important statistic, covered by FTAs from 26% to 70%. And, of course, we've got plans to grow it even further. Now, we delivered the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, a free trade agreement between Australia, Brunei, many other countries, including Vietnam, New Zealand, of course, our great friends across the ditch. It's the gold standard FTA in our region. And this particular trade agreement went into force in Australia on the 30th of December 2018. But this, the RCEP, being, of course, that modern, progressive partnership with 14 other nations in the Indo-Pacific, is going to cover all areas of a modern free trade agreement, including those difficult areas that sometimes are hard to negotiate between trade ministers. And aren't we lucky as a nation that we have the member for Wannon, a colleague of yours from Victoria, of course, on the coalition side, coalition colleague, doing what he needs to do, travelling far and wide, given difficulties that it is to travel abroad, but doing what he needs to do to be able to organise even more trade agreements. Now, specifically, the proposed amendments that we're discussing and debating will provide the rules, including the product-specific rules for determining if imported goods are RCEP originating goods. Now, this is how importers prove that their goods are produced, obtained or include sufficient content from one or more of the RCEP parties. Now, I know Senator John Williams, former senator, did a lot of work in this regard, and we have followed on that work in good faith to make sure that if a good says it is from somewhere, particularly obviously our own nation, then it is truly from that particular nation. Indeed, the line of access from product, from farm, paddock to plate is significant, and it has actually helped our trade arrangements. Now, satisfying these rules qualifies the goods for a preferential rate of customs duty when importantly imported into our nation. It requires Australian exporters and producers to keep sufficient records to enable them to prove their goods are RCEP originating goods if they claim a preferential rate of customs duty when exporting their goods to one of the other 14 RCEP parties. And that's significant. So it's two-way, good faith, and we're working towards making sure that this is obviously an important part of the bill that we're debating tonight. It also creates a new schedule of preferential customs duty rates for goods that qualify as RCEP originating goods. Now, the new rules for determining origin status of goods and record-keeping requirements for exporters and producers will be added to the Customs Act, which of course goes back to the year of Federation 1901. Now, the new schedule of preferential customs duty rates will be added to the Customs Tariff Act of 1995. Now, the Customs Act 1901 will be amended to insert rules for determining if imported goods are, as I say, RCEP originating goods. Satisfying those rules qualifies the goods for a preferential rate of customs duty when imported into Australia. Significant? Yes. And making sure that we keep faith with our trading partners is, of course, one thing that we always take very, very seriously. And making sure that we continue to provide the freshest, the cleanest, the best produce is something that our farmers, whether they're in Gippsland, whether they're in the Riverina, no matter where they are across this great nation, they take it very seriously, and we are, in fact, very lucky to have the farmers who operate under world's best practice, who make sure that every available drop of water is accounted for, who make sure that every available hectare of arable land is making they're making the best use of it. Now, the main amendment to the Customs Tariff Act 1995, inserting that new schedule of preferential rates, is part of what we're debating, part of what we're putting through. When these particular schedules have cross-party alignment, cross-party support, and the Greens are against it, well, you know, Mr Speaker, that it is a good thing. You know that it is a good thing. Why are these changes important? Why are they being made now? Well, RCEP was signed by then Trade Minister Senator Simon Birmingham back on the 15th of November 2020. And of course, we've been acting in good faith with the other 14 nations since then to nail down the important side points, the important attributes of this legislation, of this agreement, to ensure that everybody's on the same page. And when we get cross-party support, then we know it's in the national interest, and we know that it needs to be agreed to via legislation. Ensuring the agreement can enter into force as swiftly as possible, because putting it in place now makes sure that we can get the benefits, extract the benefits sooner rather than later. It's in the interests of Australian businesses, consumers and exporters. And they've done it tough. They've done it tough in recent times with COVID, with the lack of export opportunities because of the smaller number of planes coming into and leaving our country. That's why we've put in place those arrangements by which, whether they were lobster fishers in northwest Western Australia, indeed in Geraldton, indeed the salmon from Tasmania, the sheep meat from Victoria, no doubt from your electorate, Mr Speaker, but right across this nation we put in place that assistance measures so that they could be transported out of Australia. That kept and gave great hope to our exporters. This bill before the House, these amendments, continue to build on the fine trading export opportunities that we have always put in place and will continue to do so as Liberals and Nationals in government.